So if you think about, for example, look at Calgary with all of those office buildings that are sitting vacant. These are the types of things that can be seen as a challenge, but can also be seen as an opportunity. So looking at how we can then take some of these areas and actually work at redeveloping them so that we have more resiliency and more circularity. So in this project, we started, of course, by doing a bunch of background research on circular economy, how it works. We needed to really learn what it was about. So that's where we started. And of course, that landed us then on who's doing the most in the world. Not surprisingly, as so many other things in these areas, really a lot of the progressiveness is focused in Europe. So the real leaders are cities like Amsterdam, a lot in the Netherlands, a lot in the UK as well. And then we also have some spots in North America that are really starting to move forward. Austin, Texas, it's interesting, you don't think Texas as being a foundation of environmental activism, but Austin is actually very progressive when it comes to environmental initiatives of all kinds. And this is one of them. And Toronto also has really moved forward on this. So we actually brought in some engagement specialists. We sat down with each of these communities, had a workshop, had them think about the areas within their communities, within their cities that really had potential. So we did that, and that was it was amazing. They really, really came on board and got very engaged. So we did that, and after that, then we sort of brought together all the ideas they had. What we're doing as well is, you saw the places in Europe that are doing so much. We're actually creating sister cities with each of our communities. Is going to have a sister city with one of those progressive cities in Europe, so that they have somebody that they can work with and bounce ideas off of, so that they have essentially a mentor to be able to help them move forward and really develop their circularity. And part of what came out of our workshops too is each of these communities now is it has a roadmap. So out of the workshop and all the ideas they came up with, we actually developed a roadmap specific for each community that we worked with, so that they now have essentially something to follow and build on as they move towards circularity. So we collaborated with each of these, really helped them with some of the foundational work, and came up with these roadmaps. So we have one for each of those communities now. So this has been really exciting work for us, and I think has a lot of potential to move us forward. So that's a quick overview of the Circular Cities project. And of course, building on what circular economy is about. And now I would love to hear from you and your questions.
I think maybe the easiest way to ask the questions is through the chat function.
Okay, and I actually have that open now, so I can see it.
Okay, so I think that's probably the easiest way for us. And then Christina can see exactly what you want to hear.
Yeah, there's a comment here about reducing social isolation. I think that's a valid point, because the whole social element of things, like, I assume the tool library might be closed now because of the situation. But that being said, so much of these initiatives are based on a strong social structure that definitely, I think there's a role for that, for sure. I see there's a question here on where is the group on waste to energy? Is that, you're talking specifically about the St. Albert group, or there's also a Southern Alberta group? I think Kathy's probably more well placed to speak to that. Do you want to comment on that, Kathy?
Yeah, I mean, I think, I can talk about waste energy all day long, but actually I'd be interested, Christina, in where, when you talk about the R's, reuse, recycle, one of them is recover, where you are in the Recycling Council in that part, because that really goes outside of the circle when you're talking to waste to energy. So where are we sitting on products that we just can't find use for?
Yeah, the important thing to remember about, because you're right, those are the ones that are candidates for sure for waste to energy, are the materials that we just cannot do anything else with. But when you think about redesign and design, the thing to remember is that those are going to be disappearing. So as we improve design, as we move forward with systems like extended producer responsibility, the producers of those materials are going to be encouraged to modify their designs. So if something, remember the Bill McDonough thing, if it doesn't fit into a technical cycle or a nutrient cycle, it should not be made. And that's where we're ultimately heading. So one of the challenges with waste energy, well, there's multiple challenges. The biggest challenge to waste energy is it only works on a very large scale from a financial basis. So that's why only large communities like Vancouver have basically viable waste energy programs. But the other thing is waste energy relies on an input. So it requires a certain amount, basically you have to feed the mouth is what you have to do. And as we're, so it's not very nimble. And as we're removing materials from the feedstock, then there's going to be less feedstock to keep the system going. And ultimately, if we end up where we want to end up with no waste, then we have nothing to feed the system anymore. So those are just some of the high level realities of waste energy, because certainly waste energy from a technical point of view is, because you're actually getting energy, embodied energy from materials, is obviously, it is better on the environmental hierarchy than straight disposal to landfill. But again, you have all these other challenges. So my personal belief is it's not going to happen in Alberta. Okay, now I'm just going to read these others. Yeah, very good point here, Mike, on the whole consumerism thing. And this absolutely flies in the face of consumerism. That comes back to things like obsolescence. Consumerism is contrary to circular economy for sure. Consumerism is also contrary to a lot of other social good. So I would say consumerism is going to have to become less inherent for as circular economy takes hold. So for sure, if we are going to try to reinvigorate our economy just based on buying stuff and being consumers, we're not going to be any more resilient when the next crisis hits us. So we do need to reinvent our economy for sure. Sorry, go ahead.
Christina, you've talked a lot about a change, and the change must have to go to thinking on part of the consumer as well. Do you have an educational component in order to upgrade or change the thinking that we now have to move to the more integrated thought processes that would allow you to move forward with this?
100%. Nice to see you too, Anita. It absolutely, and that's one of the reasons why we're working with communities, cities and towns, because that education and that rejigging of basically our social norms has to come partly from our leaders. And we really feel that that cities and towns are so much more nimble than it's hard to have these things at a large scale happen at the provincial and national level, because it just takes them so long to do anything. Whereas we find that cities and towns really can move forward on things quickly. So that's part of the reason why we're putting a lot of our eggs in that basket, because we think the local education and the local leadership is going to be really critical in this.
Thank you.
It's really interesting question about the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. That is fascinating because I have to confess, we have not linked ourselves to those as much as we probably should. And thank you for the prompt on that, because I am going to bring those back to our next strategic planning session, and especially the responsible consumption one. Absolutely, that's a really important one that I think that we can adhere to. So that's awesome. Thank you, Stacy, for that. Oh, okay, great question. You guys have the best questions. And I will talk about EPR too. Advocacy, yeah, it's a good question. Is this just sort of the hippies out there trying to do something? You know what's fascinating about this, and part of the reason I get so excited about circular economy is a lot of the new ideas we've had in the past, things like zero waste is a good example, have kind of almost scared a lot of the larger companies, corporations really didn't grab onto those, I think because they had a hard time really understanding how they were going to work, and the language is really important with some of these. So zero waste is a bit scary to big companies, but circular economy, it's kind of almost sexy. And so we are actually getting leadership on this file, I have to say, more from some of the corporations really than we even are from the larger governments. So I actually think that's part of where this is going to come from, is we're going to get business leading the charge on issues like circular economy. They are really seeing where we have to be going. And that I think is going to be really part of how we're moving forward. So thank you for that question. It's a very good one. Now, Kathy, the question about EPR is, EPR is inherently one of the tools that is key to circular economy. So the idea of extended producer responsibility is that whoever makes the product or material doesn't get to just put it on the marketplace and walk away and leave it up to whoever bought it to take care of it after that point. So EPR says that the producer is responsible for making sure that certain targets are met and that the materials are well handled at the end of their life. So that's a game changer, because if you as a producer need to make sure that 80% of your material is recycled, you're going to pay a little more attention to whether that material is recyclable or not. Because what's happened to this point is that just got put on the shoulders of the municipalities to have to take care of. And if it didn't have a recycling market, what are they going to do about that? Municipalities have no control over recycling markets, whereas the producers completely have control over markets because they can influence them, because they are a consumer of the products that come out of the recycling process. So EPR is key, but it is only one piece. I want to be clear on that. It is one piece. It's a very important piece, but it's only one piece.
I'll just add that Christina and I have been working on EPR through a governance like across Alberta, and we submitted a report to the Minister of Environment, and Minister Nixon seems quite excited to bring in legislation. And I think, Christina, what you need to add also is that EPR exists in other provinces to varying extents, and we're watching. BC's got probably the closest to perfect model, but nothing's ever perfect. Anyway, we believe, and Christine, you can chime in, we believe that when we buy a box of Cheerios, we're already paying a little bit of that levy for the end of life use of that box of Cheerios, because it's being done in other provinces and they just set the price nationally. So, but we're not getting the benefit from that. So if EPR was ever to come to St. Albert or to Alberta, the $7 odd that's sitting on your utility bill for your blue bag would essentially just disappear. And Christine, I don't know if there's proof, but does it contribute to better environmental design? Because there was a question here about clamshells and styrofoam. So if the producer is forced to pay for the end of life of that product, will they stop using products that can't be recycled? So I don't know if that has been proven.
Yeah, and that one of the challenges right now with EPR is that because BC is the only one that has a complete EPR program for packaging, there's the issue that it's a relatively small part of the population, so it doesn't really completely influence what the producers are making. But that being said, we actually are seeing that there definitely are changes that are being made, because the producers know that this is coming. They know that they're responsible for this material. So they are starting to pay a lot more attention now to what the materials and products that they're putting on the marketplace are, for sure. And yes, you're right, BC has the most extensive program. Ontario is expanding theirs and looks like they may end up being even more aggressive than BC. That's what's interesting about EPR, is it's very much evolving. And it's largely evolving, again, because the producers are engaged in this. This is what's fascinating. EPR says that the producers have to pay to make sure that their materials are properly recycled. You would think they would be opposed to that. No, they are absolutely behind this, and they were the ones on that report that we did in Alberta that we presented to the minister, that the producers actually helped us to pay for that. Like, they truly believe that this is the way that we are headed, and because it is the way we're headed, they want to be at the table. So for sure, EPR is coming. It is coming. Alberta, unfortunately, is behind. We're a little bit behind the 8 ball in this one, but it is coming, and it's going to be a very important part to this.
Have you found a way to incorporate the huge apartment buildings and condos that are being developed in most of the major cities, and in St. Albert in particular, because those areas are somewhat offline with the regular homeowner on the street, who has the opportunities to put his blue bag out or her blue bag out, whereas in the condos, sometimes that opportunity is not there. And I don't know if you've thought of how you might move into that area.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because we have a strong distinction in our system between residential recycling systems that are delivered by municipalities and what we call industrial, commercial, institutional systems, which are everything that's not the fundamental residential. And that includes things like condos, apartments. And because those are delivered by the private sector, they don't have the same systems that the municipal programs do. And that definitely creates an issue. And that's one of the things we as the Recycling Council believe that EPR should apply to ICI as well. That has not happened anywhere yet. So Anita, we actually believe that that ultimately needs to happen before that is going to be resolved.
Okay, I think we just have time for 1 or 2 more questions, Christina.
Okay,
I think Ian has a question.
Excellent. Oh, do you want me to speak to the chat one, or Ian, are you going to actually ask the question?
So there's 2 things I think that I have. So there's 2 things. I'm not sure if you're aware of the smaller scale waste to energy.
I'm very aware of it.
Okay, the smaller scale.
Yeah, we delivered a workshop on that where we brought experts from the States and from Europe. We actually delivered a workshop. It's too bad you probably should have been there.
Was that the one?
Sorry, we talked. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. Was that the one in Fort Saskatchewan there?
Yes, it was.
Okay, so I was there for that. The thing that I see is the world seems to think that you can only do this in a financially viable way on a really large scale, like the one in the UK that takes about $300 million before you can see an ROI. My question, or part 1, is: are you aware of a smaller scale waste to energy plant that'll do what that'll do, but on a smaller scale and a much shorter ROI?
No. So a lot of these smaller scale ones work on what we call bench scale size. They're absolutely technically possible, But the real problem with waste to energy is it only works if you have a homogeneous feedstock, and building a homogeneous feedstock is very expensive and is also very difficult. So that's usually the crunch, that's the issue. And we're competing against things like very inexpensive natural gas in this province. And it's not that these things are not technically possible. They're completely technically possible. If you have enough money, you can make them work. The problem is to make them financially work is a challenge. I think we are going to see more of these. Absolutely, they're emerging, and there are going to, like, look at the experimentation that the city of Edmonton is doing. Look at the hundreds of millions of dollars that have been put into that system. It does work, yes, but it takes time and it takes money.
Oh, okay, so I think that we should have a sidebar chat, because I think I have a solution for that exact problem there. The other thing I'm wondering about is, sorry, the other thing I'm wondering about is if you can do it on a smaller scale, if the carbon footprint is larger, if the carbon footprint is larger, to actually take that can or the plastic and have it recycled, does it make more sense to put out that carbon footprint versus turn it into power and convert that potential energy from there into energy without the carbon footprint? Where do you stand on that?
What a fantastic question. And that might even be the one to end on, because that's one thing I cover in my usual recycling presentations. One thing that is very, very clear and has been validated many times by groups like the EPA and Environment Canada is recycling is by far, by orders of magnitude from a carbon basis, the best option. So all of these other options, whether it's landfill, whether it's waste to energy, these options don't even come close to the greenhouse gas benefits that are produced through recycling. And the reason why that is because making materials is very energy intensive. It doesn't matter what the material is. It's energy intensive to make things. Once you make them once, you have actually already embedded that process, and when you go to recycle it, then you don't have to completely remake it. So what you're doing is you're taking advantage of the fact that you've already accessed that material, you've already formed that material, and it's way less intensive to make it the second time than it is to make it the first time. And I am happy to share those numbers with anybody who's interested, but it's not even close. Like it's orders of magnitude different. They're not even close. So we always want to follow the waste hierarchy, which is reduction and then reuse and then recycling. And those completely always win against the disposal options, and waste energy is a disposal option.
Hey, I'm going to jump in there if that's okay.
Yep.
Is my microphone working now, Les?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yes.
Perfect. Well, thank you, Christina. This is really, really good. I'm glad I got the opportunity to talk to you. Kathy's been trying to line this up for a very long time. I loved your presentation. I thought it was great. Just a couple of points for me. Circular economies in Alberta or Canada will never, ever, ever exist while we still have linear functionality on our toilets and on our wastewater. It's just a fact.
Yep.
You mentioned about in one of your presentations about the circular side on the water aspect, which is great, but I think you're missing a big part there, which is that reuse of the water as well. Again, going back to different leaders in the circular economy, Norway has a zero landfill policy. So to me, they're a leader in circular economies, also with their wastewater. So they have zero landfill and they recycle all their wastewater. That to me is a true leader. I sit on a board called SDG 6, and I write the paper, the only one for the UN, on sustainable populations with zero waste. So when Ian was talking about smaller units, we have units right now. I was working with the Alberta government very, very late last night. We're putting units into Asia right now that are 2 foot by 3 foot in size, that in small communities work extremely well. But they work extremely well because they put tariffs on other forms of energy. That's something here in Alberta, especially, I think we need to get on board with and say to our producers of electricity, you guys are going to fail because of your environmental stance. So whilst small villages, small cities here in Alberta don't have the opportunity to buy power elsewhere or have a different aspect when it comes to that, other countries are already looking at that. And what I mean by that is the standard in Thailand, I was working with, like I said, the Alberta government last night, we're working in Thailand right now. Thailand's standard power is extremely cheap. But when it comes to renewable energy, depending on whether the renewable energy comes from a biomass, a typical waste, a landfill source, whatever it be, their power might go from a 3 cent up to a 14 cent payable. That's huge as far as US dollars are concerned. Also here in Alberta, we're working with a few of the eco centers now. One of the eco centers in particular that I could discuss, but I won't online, they're burying their blue bags right now. I don't see that as a sustainable way forward. So when an eco center takes a blue bag and they go, we don't know what to do with this anymore, they condense it as much as they can, still in the blue bag, but then they bury that whole pallet. I have real issues with that.
Me too.
We're working also with Alberta Health Services to dispose of, right now, there's lots of test facilities for COVID-19. There's lots of medical waste from seniors housing as well as everything else. Nobody knows what to do with it. Landfill is not an option. So we're working with those guys right now, but unfortunately Alberta doesn't have enough rules and regulations in place to actually test our equipment. When we talk about, bench scale modeling, we've sold over 100 units of these things just here in North America, ranging from that 2 foot by 3 foot. We can grow in size. Those 2 foot by 3 foot ones are about $40,000. So that would do a small community. We're doing jails, we're doing hospitals, and like I said, we're doing these AHS type ones. But we had to send all that waste to Missouri, US 2 weeks ago just to get tested because there wasn't enough things here in Alberta. Well, we came in at 90% below EPA reductions and almost 50% below Alberta, what they apparently have reductions in. So there's lots of changing fields and there's lots of different things that we could actually put more into our, not only our consumers, but also back onto big business, big energy, big things like that, and go, you know what, guys, renewable, and you use that in part, but that reuse terms or that recovery term even, we could go a lot further than what we are. So that's just a couple of bits from my thing. I did a full list, but I won't bore you with everything. Thank you again. Thank you for joining us today.
No, thank you. And I would really like to hear more about some, because you're right. We have, our system in Alberta does not encourage a lot of alternatives. It's so true. And that's why they're not going to happen here, is largely because of that. It doesn't mean it can't be changed from a policy point of view, but yeah, love to talk to you more at some point about that.
Well, even with your, yes, Stacey, I can share my list. It's on the back of a recycled piece of paper. The big thing here, I mean, I've worked with Minister McKinnon as well. She's joined me in China for trade missions over there to see what we do over there. And yet that's great that we can do all that. That's great that I presented to the International Joint Committee for the water, for example, in the Great Lakes and recovering of plastics and all that. But just because it happens there in Ottawa, it takes a long time to filter back to here. That's the unfortunate side.
Absolutely.
Good luck in your endeavors.
Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Christina, for your presentation this morning. I do have a certificate to send to you. One of the signature projects for Rotary International is End Polio Now. So we make a donation in your name, and I will send that certificate on via email to you. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
So we do have
this was a pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah, we'd like to hear more from another time. So we do have a couple of club announcements. The exchange program. Charlene, do you want to talk about the exchange program for next year?
There isn't one. What's that? Yeah, we, because of COVID, district has made probably a very wise choice to hold off on the exchange program. So unfortunately, Rebecca Carl is not going to Belgium in August like she planned. And we'll have to talk about what happens with her in the future. But the exchange program, my understanding is will hopefully go the next year. It's a big part of what our club does. As you can see by most mornings, the Zoom has been great for our past exchange students to join us, and they love the format. Anything else, Anne?
No, just unfortunately, we will be out of, everybody's out of the program next year.
Yes.
So one other announcement, we had a board meeting last week, and Craig Mallon has been appointed to set up a task force to have a look at what we're doing here in the Rotary Club of St. Albert to help local charities, non-profits. What is the need in our community? So Craig is setting up a task force to do that. We've taken the seed money for the 30th anniversary project, and we've actually put that into this task force. And Craig is looking at, with a small group of people, what is the need here in St. Albert? How can we help? So we'll have to stay tuned for that to see what Craig and his small group come up with. I don't think we have Alan on the screen today, do we?
No.
Alan Murdoch. I just wanted to thank Alan for his updates. I don't know where he gets his information from, but he seems to ferret it out and make sense of it. So it's great to have Alan's commentary on what's happening.